So I think we're ready. Thank you and thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're going to talk about streets. This month we're talking maps, and one of the best things to talk about the city of Wausau and get a good view of what our history has been about through all these many years. Ignore the little Clark's Island 1873. I think that street sign was a little bit earlier than that. But through the years, we have gone through a variety of different maps that show us a lot about our city. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. A trivia question that I'm going to ask, and I ask other people, and as we talk about streets, one of the more curious things that is what is the shortest street that we can think of in the city of Wausau? So we'll have an answer at the end, but that's something for you to think about. It is on the map on your right, but we will come to that a little bit later. But first of all, we're going to go back in the early on. The way the streets were laid out pretty much is they gave a lot of the street names to a variety of people that we're going to be talking about. This is an early map of the city. You can see that when they started to name the streets, and we'll see this pretty much as a trend throughout the whole city, is they gave the names of some of the early streets to presidents. And we can see that here: Jackson, Washington, Jefferson, Winfield Scott, not a president. He was a general out of the West and into the Civil War. But one of our main streets in this city is named after Winfield Scott. I think he ran for president at one time, but certainly a general. And at the bottom of this map, we see forest. Well, after all, we did come into a forest. So I can see where they would have named a street after the great forest, the great white pine forest that was certainly all around us when this map was drawn up. I tilted the map a little bit because this is that same map, but you can see that there was a main street in Wausau. Eventually they renamed that first street because you see Second Street a little bit further on down on the map. And then up towards the Wisconsin River, the top map was Shingle Street. That is no longer there, but it's still there in a way because Cakebush Plaza and below the library and all that riverfront area below the library at one time was a street, and at one time that was called Shingle Street. So that's one of our lost streets that are no longer here, but we still do acknowledge that shingles were a big part of our industry in the early days, drawing on the lumber, of course, and we're led to name one of our streets Shingle Street. This is looking south on, as you go up, you're looking south on Main Street, an early map of the city. Washington Street coming in pretty much where the library is now, a variety of August Cakebush's grocery store there on the corner of Washington and Main. Going up the map, you see Alexander Stewart's offices, a saloon, Jackson Street up on top off on your left. So, pretty primitive, but this is the map of pretty much the way the early folks in Wausau were maneuvering and using the general stores, the boarding houses, the saloons, all a part of early Wausau, and this map certainly shows that. I want to come back again to the naming of some of these streets. We see with this map the naming of our city fathers started to happen with McIndoe, with Walter McIndoe. Of course, the Historical Society is on McIndoe Street. but now we start to name the streets after other people beside presidents. We have Walter McIndoe here as you go up, Presidents Adam. Of course, we have Grant and Franklin, Fulton in a minute, Adams, Alexander Hamilton, an early founding father of the country, also starting to be acknowledged and naming of these streets. Then you say, what about the interesting story is General McClellan. General McClellan gets a pretty prominent place in downtown Wausau, McClellan Street, George McClellan. It's kind of curious that President Lincoln doesn't get acknowledged until way up on the north side of Wausau, but here's McClellan. Of course, we have to realize that in 1860, Marathon County did not vote for Abraham Lincoln. In fact, they voted for his opponent, and I think and George McClellan ran for president in 1864 against Abraham Lincoln. So perhaps General McClellan was getting a little bit more acknowledgement at that time than even our Civil War president, Abraham Lincoln. As again, another map, some of the streets, Hamilton on the far north, moving south, the Kickbush, August Kickbush, Daniel Plummer, a variety of our city fathers starting to be acknowledged in the naming of some of the streets. Moving then to the west side is we get a little clearer picture of some of the early lumber barons getting their names on streets in the city. On the west side, off of Stewart Ave, maybe we should start with Stewart Avenue, Alexander Stewart, early lumber baron. William Callan, he had a mill up on Trap City up on the Wisconsin River. He also had one on the east on the Eau Claire River. Walter Alexander, of course, a large lumber baron in the city, dominant person throughout many decades of our history, and John Clark, one of the early founders of our city, one of the early lumber people in this city. So again, they're acknowledged in this little neighborhood up on the west side, north of Stewart Avenue. But then north of that again, we see another neighborhood with tree names: the elms, the maples, the spruces, the cedars, the oaks, all part of again acknowledging the lumber industry, the great white pine, and the other trees, the other lumber. That was certainly a big part of the sawmills of early Wausau. And then coming a little bit to the south on the west side, pretty dominant neighborhoods of Civil War people. We'll start at the north with Porter Street. That's just a little street that would be eventually running into Marathon Park by Lincoln School. Then coming south, I'll get to West Street in a minute. Sherman William Tecumseh Sherman. Then comes William Rosecrans to the south of that. To the south of that, George Thomas. Then a little bit of they call it a road. It's sort of a block and a half, really, on the west side coming off of 17th is Sheridan Road coming off Philip Sheridan. I'll back up a little bit because I wanted to talk a little bit about the streets that are not part of the Civil War. Mr. West was an early promoter of the West Side, and as well as Pardee, both investors, both early settlers on the West Side. So Pardee and West were early early settlers into this part of the west side of Wausau. So throughout our history, you know, some streets have gone away. I talked a little bit about Shingle. That's no longer there. But another large, fascinating street that in our history is what would come to be called Clinton Street. And this is an early picture, late 1800s, just pointing out the Scott Street Bridge. Some of these buildings may not be recognizable, and certainly we're looking east, so we get a little bit of the Wisconsin River, we get a little bit of the west side. Certainly this is not recognizable. A lot of sawmills going and doing their thing, and at this time, the Scott Street Bridge, pretty primitive, coming over Clark's Island and then to the west side. And then to the west side, we have something called Clinton Street. It's okay, it's long gone, but it was quite a commercial center for Wausau's west side for many, many years. Curtis and Yale was on the north side of Clinton. The trolley came down Clinton Street over the bridge, and then on the south side of Clinton Street was a variety of different landmark businesses in this city. Notably, this is where Sam's Pizza first started. They had a little bit of a building, and when the owners came into Wausau, they saw that empty building, and they immediately got hold of it, started making their Sam's Pizza, and then they lived up on the second floor. Quite a unique street, captured by Mr. Becker in his art, but I think he does a very good job of showing the dynamic view of the street, looking east, seeing the bank, as well as the now the landmark building, at that time the Hotel Wausau, looking east. But eventually that street went away. It made way for Stewart Avenue, coming off of the Scott Street Bridge, flowing very quickly into Stewart Avenue, Highway 29 going west. So within our city, there's a couple plan districts that we can see with our maps. One is the Eau Claire Boulevard district on the southeast side of the city, off of Grand Avenue. These plan districts have boulevards. So if you go down, if you make a right-hand turn off of Grand Avenue to Eau Claire Boulevard, you can see the variety of boulevards. That's one of two. The other one is the Highland Park Boulevard district, up off of Highland Park, a little bit south of Tom Field, off of 10th Street. Again, these are the only two known planned boulevard districts in the city. And I use this as an introduction to some of the things that were going on in our Wausau's history, that if we would have continued, would have made things a little bit difficult in getting around. One is on the southwest and southeast sides so if you start on Thomas Street up by, I think it's 12th Avenue there, and you move east, you sort of you have to turn onto William Street, which is after the little turn there, and then you go down Stroller's Lane, and then you move into Lemke Street. Well, City Fathers not long ago, maybe longer ago than I think, turned this all into Thomas Street. So you're flowing pretty well from 17th, maybe even further west than that, all the way to the east side of Wausau, on what we now know as Thomas Street. But at one time there was 1, 2, 3, 4 street names on this little stretch of road. The other one that I want to quickly mention is the follow the blue line from on the top of your map is Stewart Avenue. Follow the blue line coming down what was then called Harrison Boulevard. Of course, the city fathers changed this so that the Harrison Boulevard would move quickly and flow easily into the northern part, which was First Avenue. So Harrison Boulevard went away, but now we have one long stretch of First Avenue. And then some curious things happening on the northwest side of Wausau. You see here, they were naming tamarack, hemlock. These were street names that were a part of this Columbia edition, but if they would have stayed the way it was, we would not, and Pine Street in Kansas, they changed the what eventually would have been a numbered avenue to a named avenue. Maybe that would have created a little bit of ease in this day and age, but certainly if they would have kept those names, we would certainly be confused. There's a lot of difference in what we now call those streets. And I know this is a confused map, but if you take a look at some of the streets up and north and south of Franklin Street on the east side of Michigan, you have Minnesota, Michigan, you have Park, you have Liberty Street, you have Park, you have Central Avenue. All of these were the east-west streets were changed. In fact, at this point in time, we had 2 Park. We had this part, if this was Park Street, and then we would have had another Park Avenue up by the ballpark. So this was really confusing, and the city fathers changed this, I think in 1911, when they sort of maneuvered some of these streets into numbered streets and changed some of the other streets' names. You see that some of even the North, the Krems, the Hofflingers, the Summits were all changed to numbered streets eventually. And then we have some new streets. So we are continually adding streets in the city. One new street that we have is coming off of Shingle Avenue on the southeast side. It's Excelsior Drive. The city just discovered that there was this little bit of street that did not have a name, and they came by this name because there was an Excelsior plant close to it. So city staff dug into the history of this area and named it Excelsior Drive after the history of the Excelsior plant in this neighborhood. And on the far west side of the city, in new city property out on Highway O, is something called Innovation Way. This is sort of part of the industrial complex out on the west side. So they named it Innovation Way, hoping that more innovative new plants and factories and businesses come out into this part of the city. So then I will come to the answer for what I think is the little trivia question that I posed at the beginning. A little bit north of the Marathon County Historical Society are 2, well, I would call short streets. One is indeed Short Street, coming off of 3rd Street, a little bit to the north of the railroad tracks, in the neighborhood of the Glass Hat and the Pollock Inn. But a little shorter street is something called Little Street, coming off of 5th Street, flowing into 4th Street. It's just really a half a It's just really a half a block. Well, it would most likely be a short block long. It's coming off. I looked at it today. There's a Hamilton Street a sign on there, but I think it really belonged. I think in the early days this was called Little Street, and as far as I can see in this city, I think that that is perhaps the shortest street in the city. If anybody has other ideas, let me know. I think that just a little bit of trivia will be, and these streets are just a little bit to the north of the Marathon County Historical Society, up off of 3rd and 5th Streets in the city. So with that, I want to draw to a close. This just a little bit of a history of Wausau, some of the new things in the map field of the city. We've undergone a variety of changes in our maps, and the naming of the streets itself is, I think, an important part. We certainly honor presidents, we honor city fathers, we honor Civil War generals, we honor the trees that brought so many people into this city. Always there will always be new streets. There will always be opportunities for naming new streets. So we look forward to all of that.